I think the other thing is some people are non-committal because maybe they feel paralyzed. There's so much to do and it feels overwhelming that I can't really commit to doing the thing that I want to do. Or, Jilda, you want to hang out with me? And I'm like, well, maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't, because I don't feel like I have control over my priorities. And so just check in and see like what's showing up for you in that spot would be my biggest advice. Or I do this all the time of like, what's showing up, what's getting in the way of my priorities, how's my boundary situation going. I also found at one point that I didn't know what made me happy or content, that I was really had to sit with that for a minute and say, well, I think what makes me happy is hanging out with my kids, but is it? But I don't know, but that's not all of me, right? And so really sitting with that inquiry and being gentle with yourself around finding your priorities, then planning for them, putting boundaries and safeguarding them. All of those things are part of the journey, I think, about living intentionally.
Well, hi and welcome. This is Jilda Vander Hayden, and I'm joined here today by a very special guest of mine, Miss Aila Malik, who is the founder and principal of Venture Leadership. And just to give you a little bit of background on Aila, she is one of the most phenomenal people I know, first of all. And not only has she had a background in being an executive director and leader of nonprofit organizations herself, and she also is now in a position where she helps nonprofits not only achieve their missions, but really in a very unique way, none that I've ever come across before, where she actually gets in to the organization and becomes part of the team and really helps them through things like special transitions, different projects that they've always had on their wish list. She's just absolutely amazing. You'll have to fill us in a little bit more, Aila. I don't know if I did a good enough job to do it justice. And I also wanted to note, fun fact about Aila, she's actually an author of a children's book. And back when she was doing all the work she does, she's so passionate, so dedicated, she earned herself an award. And it was in 2011. It's called the ABA Child Advocate of the Year Award. So she's just amazing. And I'm so, so happy that you're able to join us. And we're actually going to be talking about all things work-life balance, which is a big part of well-being at work in general. And so, Aila, is there anything else you want the audience to know about you? You're just
Well,
amazing.
first of all, thank you. And I'm so excited to be here. And it's nice. It's actually really nice, Jilda, to have a relationship with you that started on Clubhouse and moved into the real world, not, audio, social media world, into the real world. And now we get to have a friendship that has lasted more than a year, which is very cool. I think the thing I would maybe add, just from the perspective of work-life balance, is that I'm a mom of 3. And so my oldest now is a junior in high school, and my youngest is a 5th grader, which just brings a different dimension into juggling, what balance may mean for me at different points of my own trajectory. So yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. A lot of times we kind of start out with talking about work-life balance and what it really means. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to spend too much time there, but the bottom line is we all know there's not it's not exactly a real thing. It's just everybody sort of has their own flavor of what that looks like. And it's a constant iteration. So we'll just leave it at that. And I'm sure you agree with that.
Yep.
But is there anything just in general about that whole work-life balance in, that concept that you think is important in general for people to know before we start diving into some of the more detailed questions?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can't double click enough with you that it's about a tension that you're managing rather than a point of arrival or an iteration that you're constantly exploring. A wise coach once told me, there's the mantra that I repeat a lot when I'm trying to assess that sort of equilibrium point for me for right here, right now, is where am I saying no for a bigger yes? And so constantly looking at, like, if balance is trying to find a momentary piece of equilibrium then that there is a decision point there. There's something that I'm saying no to for this bigger yes of a gain in a different domain or in a different place. Or and so I think of that a lot as to how I might prioritize pieces of the balance, or those moments, or assess what is it that needs to be true for managing that tension, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting you say that because I came across, I don't remember where I read it, but I came across something that talked about your brain can only really focus on very little things at the same time, and the
Right.
idea that it's almost better to take two things that you're considering, put it right in front of you, and one of the suggestions was taking a Post-it note and just putting those two things, and even if you have to have multiple Post-it notes with
Mhm,
all those decision points, somehow that makes it easier for our minds to digest and then move forward with. So I thought it was
mhm,
interesting because I know
mhm,
I remember on one of our Clubhouse rooms, we'd all talked about the Post-it note method where,
mhm,
that helps to a degree. You've got this huge to-do list, and it's a matter of, you know, well, what are my top 3 or 2 or 6? And I've even kind of tweaked a little bit further where if I have like a call, like, interview like this, I'll say, well, my pre-interview to do and my post-interview to do,
mhm,
what is that on a Post-it note, and kind of different modifications that way. So
mhm.
to
I
use
love
that.
that.
Yeah. So speaking of different strategies or tools, are there any in particular you're finding to be the most effective, especially when it comes to managing your time?
The one for me, I really center on a calendar. So my job, as you correctly identified, is about going into different workplace contexts. So at any given time, I technically have like 4 or 5 workplace contexts. So I have 4 or 5 jobs, and then I've got my home domain, and then I've got, the domains of things that maybe are my creative outlets or things that may give me joy or fulfillment. And so having having a place where there's compartmentalization to write your to-do list or your sticky notes in each of those in those domains is really helpful. And then putting those things on a shared calendar. So if I have multiple calendars, a home calendar, workplace, interim, you know, executive calendar, venture leader calendar, whatever those calendars are, having a master one in which everything dumps so that I'm really scheduling my priorities, not prioritizing my schedule. So
Mm,
figuring out, first, I'll usually go at the beginning of the year and say, okay, what are the days off that I think I want to take? Or what do I want to do? What kind of goals do I want to do? And putting them in my calendar, space and place for them, even if they change, but now I have units that I can move if something conflicts, centering everything that I want to do on the calendar, and then finding space to put the other priorities, deliverables, time to do that work on the same calendar is hugely helpful for me, because then I can just follow and trust week by week what the
okay.
day is presenting, right? So I
Yeah.
would say the biggest tool for me that I don't think I could do without is a central calendar space that's sort of transparent across my domains.
Okay. And so you, just to kind of clarify, because a lot of people say, well, if they're looking at their calendar, anyone's calendar, you can see what someone's priorities are. And that sounds
Yes.
like you live by that. But at
Yes.
the same time, that what you just said a moment ago was kind of pretty, like, almost like it just like a hit, like, wow, wait, what does she mean by that? So you had said that, you know, scheduling your priorities versus your calendar, like
Versus
dictating.
prioritizing your schedule.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah. So what did you, can you, like, explain
yeah,
what, I know you explained your process, but just like that hit home and I'm like, wow, what does that mean and what does that really look like?
yeah, I mean, I think it means, you know, life happens
Yeah.
and we start to schedule to-dos reactively because there's a reality to executing those.
Mhm.
And every now and then, whether it's a weekly practice, an annual practice, and all of the above, starting to understand and look at, like, okay, what are my priorities in the coming quarter, month, week, year, and putting those into your calendar and working the rest of your calendar around that priority. So let me give you an example. I have a friend who uh, has missed her dental cleaning appointments for a long time, and she's starting to have root canals and all kinds of things happening. And she said, "Oh, if only I would have been more diligent, but I just never had the time."
Mm.
So in that scenario, she's prioritizing her calendar, her schedule, and all the other to-dos reactively over prioritizing the proactive thing that she wants to do so that she doesn't result in a catastrophe or a crisis later, right? And
Mhm.
so it's about saying, even if you don't know where it is, here's a hold for
Right.
self-care. Here's a hold for
Ah,
a medical appointment. Here's a
okay.
hold for, so you're scheduling holds for your priorities or the actual appointments, and you're slotting them in
Mhm.
before your calendar gets filled up with everything
Okay.
else around it, right?
Ah, beautiful.
And if you're like me, I have somebody that supports me in calendaring. If I don't schedule my priorities, then that person thinks that that's free
Mhm.
time to put in meetings, right?
Right,
And
right.
so if having a lunch from 12 to 1 is really important to you, or going for a walk is really important to you, or
Okay.
picking up your kids from school, then blocking off those places in your calendar ahead of time and letting everything else slot in, because there will
Mhm.
always be things to slot in,
Yes.
means that you're really prioritizing, you're scheduling your priorities as opposed to having your priorities get jumbled into the calendar. So where is your attention? Is it on your priorities, or is your attention on following your calendar? And the reality is you can do both. You can, once you know that your priorities are scheduled in your calendar and there's holds and there's protected time, then you can actually prioritize your schedule because your schedule is intentional. You know that those things are caught, are being addressed and handled just by going through the motions.
Ah,
I think that makes sense. I'm not sure if that's
absolutely. Yes. Yes, it does. And then I guess it's interesting, is there anything that you use to help you maybe put the actual goals that you have in mind and then slotting them out, or like you said, setting them aside in your actual calendar? Because, for example, there was a one of my interview guests, if anyone caught the episode with Van States, what he does is he just says his family time and his vacation time is so important that he puts that on his calendar first thing, and then everything else falls around that. And I guess it's a little bit of a mindset sort of shift, because you're right. Everyone is just so used to, like, life and all the activities, and then following that, or as fires come up, etc. It's really easy to just do that. And like your friend, oh, well, yeah, I know I gotta do it, but she just keeps kinda living off of that calendar, that it just never gets on there unless you are intentional about it and you make it a priority, which is what I'm hearing. So, I guess, not to get too into the weeds, but are there, like, for folks who are maybe stuck in they're in that mode of just following the calendar, any other tools that they could use to sort of help them get out of that? I mean, my thought is, just sitting down and first of all planning and being intentional about, like, what you want. Like, speaking of which, I actually did like a 5 goal list, and now it's kind of helping me kind of stay on track with, hey, do I need to add this time on the calendar? But I'm talking about where now you already have your goals, but there must be something in particular you might be doing that, and I think it's a step further where you're planning it in advance. Like, these are so important, you're planning it way further out, and not necessarily just taking the day to day and filtering through, okay, let me look at this, which is also a tool, but I'm just curious, for those that are in that other boat, like, what you would recommend.
um so I guess gosh, there's so many thoughts that are coming to my mind. I think for folks that feel like they don't, like, that their calendar does not reflect their intentionality,
Mhm.
if you look at your calendar and you feel like it does not reflect your intentional priorities, then I think my advice would be to really, on a separate piece of paper, list out what those intentional priorities should be. So your 5 goals, like you just shared, or what is it for you that helps keep you fulfilled, that help. Or for me, a lot of times it's just protected space that's unagendized so that I can decide in that moment what I want to do. Maybe I want to just do nothing and watch mindless TV. Maybe I
Right.
want to, right? And so so having a list of like what do you what's important to you, which inevitably should track back to what keeps you fulfilled or what keeps you refueled or what keeps you engaged in life, right? Like those things need to be listed somewhere, right? And then you can look at your calendar and say, okay, let me start by finding a place to put 1 to 2 to 3 holds or spaces for these things. And it may be when you're first starting off that the first place that you can see an opening is 2 or 3 months from now. That's
Mm.
okay. Like
Mhm.
you can give yourself grace and it can start where there's white space on your calendar, but then put those as reoccurring or holds or plan those out over the course of a year to 2 years so that it doesn't get so that the noise builds around it as opposed to taking it over, right? So I think my advice for somebody who's kind of like, how do I get out of this would be like, have some clarity on what it is that fuels you and
Mhm.
look for the first available place to plot those things out. Or if you can't see that, is there something that can be moved or dropped to make room for it? And the second question or the second thought that comes for me in answer to that question is just to do a little tune up check or a check in, I guess you could say, around what your relationship to conflict and boundaries is.
Mm.
Because oftentimes, when people can't see a way to make their calendars more intentional, oftentimes it's because they feel overcommitted. And
Mhm.
maybe that's because there hasn't been, there needs to be a brush up or a tune up around what holding a boundary may mean. Holding a boundary may mean that you're not signing up for things. It may mean that you're not rescuing things for other people as much. It may mean that you're starting to have, I had to work hard to create space to say to loved ones every time my loved ones knew that, the family was gone or the kids or my husband were gone, they'd be like, "Great, can you come with me to do this?" And I
Ah,
almost had to say, "Actually, I'm really trying to practice making time for myself and really listening to what needs to be true for me. So even though I really want to hang out with you so and so, I'm actually going to try to practice my boundary." And I had to say that
yeah.
until I could get used to what that felt like for me, but people respected it. But because what would happen is I would just sign up and do things for other people, and pretty soon the thing that I needed got railroaded, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I think the other thing is some people are non-committal because maybe they feel paralyzed. There's so much to do and it feels overwhelming that I can't really commit to doing the thing that I want to do. Or, Jilda, you want to hang out with me? And I'm like, well, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't, because I don't feel like I have control over my priorities. And so just check in and see like what's showing up for you in that spot would be my biggest advice. Or I do this all the time of like what's showing up, what's getting in the way of my priorities, how's my boundary situation going. I also found at one point that I didn't know what made me happy or content, that I was really had to sit with that for a minute and say, well, I think what makes me happy is hanging out with my kids, but is it? But I don't know, but that's not all of me, right? And so really sitting with that inquiry and being gentle with yourself around find your priorities, then planning for them, putting boundaries and safeguarding them. All of those things are part of the journey, I think, about living intentionally.
That is wonderful, Isla. I mean, really, because you just hit exactly
Mhm.
what I was trying to really have you share, because a lot are just stuck and are in a space where they don't feel they have control. They know they want something different and they
Mhm.
can't figure out a way out. But for someone who has it, I wouldn't say made, but just has a semblance of what her priorities are and does her best to live by them, as a great
Mhm.
example, it's it's always how do you get from A to B, and not to get into too much of the how-tos, but it's so important that you shared that. So
Mhm.
really thank you. And I couldn't have asked for a better answer. So thank you so much for that. That's just very profound. And I would say another thing just to add on, you all can tell Isla's super self-aware. So the fact that she's asking herself these questions is
Mhm.
wonderful. But it's also, she gives herself pause to be able to have that thought and that inquiry. And I think that's one of the big things that a lot of folks stuck in the overwhelm feel, that It would be a luxury to have time to think. But here's the key of, as we just heard from Isla, she knows how important it is. And I think once you start to even do a little mini baby step toward it and you see the effects and how much you benefit from it, it'll get easier along the way. And it's just something that you're just going to get so much more out of it that it's gonna be really worth that, setting that aside and putting that white space on your calendar specifically for that. Even though right now it might feel hard to do because you have so much going on.
Well, and I think just to be real for a second about the
Yeah.
time of the white space of thinking, like they're depending on what folks are holding and the trajectory of their lives, like being real, that white space may come on the toilet, it may come
Yeah,
in the shower, it may
right.
come driving, right? Like there was a period where I was like, gosh, I cannot find space for my brain to think by myself.
Mhm.
And it was the answer for me was like, oh, I need to try to wake up an hour earlier before the whole
Mhm.
house does. Well, then
Right.
what has to be true for me to sleep an hour earlier to wake up an hour, right? So like,
Right.
and for some people that's a luxury. They're like, well, that's not happening in my house because I
Mhm.
have a puppy or a newborn or
Yeah.
whatever else, and I don't have control over my sleep schedule. And so, great. It may be that you need to really take advantage of that nap schedule or really realize that this is a season in your life where you're only going to get that thinking time for 1 hour a week, and that's going to be the luxury. So I want to also just set the tone that like all this navel gazing time doesn't have to be candles meditation. It really can be like the moments that you can snag in between what your life is allowing you to feel space for. But the power of being at choice, just going to pause and just say back to our first question or first comment, I said it was saying no for a bigger yes. My bigger
Mhm.
yes at this place in my life may be that I'm really a caretaker. I am an executive. My bigger yes right now is to really jam and be head down and be in the grind. And I'm saying no to cutting out these 3 or 4 things in my life to give me the space to think and be more intentional and more creative and more fulfilled.
Mhm.
That's not a wrong stance at all. And what I want to say is that what just that frame, the frame of being really busy and saying no to maybe taking a pause is a different frame than like, I have no control and my calendar is running me.
Right.
One puts you in choice of that situation, even though the implication of it may feel exactly the same. And the other puts you out of choice and it's happening to you. And the implication is that you're busy. And just that little shift of
Mhm.
intentionality opens up more things over time, right? Because then maybe my no for my bigger yes is going to change. Actually, I'm going to say no to this friend, or I'm going to say no to watching this TV show, or I'm going to say no to this glass of wine for the bigger yes of waking up a little more rested or waking up an hour early or taking a longer shower. Whatever that is for you
Right.
starts from what you're trying to be intentional about and having grace with yourself along the way. So if any of your listeners think that, I have the luxury to just sit and navel gaze, I probably do now that my kids are older, and they're busy and independent. It, but some of those like moments or those like inquiries were just noticing and holding that question and then
Yeah.
going to sleep and seeing what dream came, or holding that question and showering and just seeing maybe if a different thought came in. It wasn't so, you know what I mean? It wasn't so prescriptive or therapeutic often in really busy times of my life.
Yes, yes. Thank you for bringing that up because it's, you're making it more attainable for
Mhm.
someone who's just like, what do I do? And it's also, yeah, like you said, with the seasons of where you are. I mean, I remember days when, like you said, that time in the bathroom was like the sacred time because with
Mhm.
young kids, that's really the only time that you have to think for
Totally.
yourself. So totally get that. But just reiterating Isla's point, she's talking about just setting the intention and having in the back of your mind is so powerful that you'll start to see these little gaps of, maybe you're waiting for your kids from an activity that you're picking them up from, something small like that, that you have an extra 5 minutes. So I would just maybe remind people that, I know there's an urge or this dopamine hit to just go to our phones or devices, is to maybe just take a pause right before and then think of your intention. Here's your chance. Here's your white space. Even if it's 2 minutes, take it. But that's beautiful. And in fact, that's perfect because that was one of my next questions, which you already answered partially. But I guess I would ask, Isla, are there any other key mindset shifts like the one you just talked about that are really important and make a big difference in creating more balance in the little everyday moments?
Yeah, I mean, you just triggered one for me just by your last example. For a year, I tried. So I'll say a lot of what I do is try stuff on. And
Yeah.
the frame I have, the mindset that I have in my mind is like you're going to try it. You're going into, a dressing room and you're going to try on a coat. And I'm going to try it on. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to spin. I'm going to go show my friends. And then I'll decide if it's serving me or not. Or maybe it's too hot, or maybe I want something different. And so I try on a lot of different things. And one of the things I tried on was for a year, did a I turned off my phone every Sunday, my cell phone. I would just turn it off. And it was really interesting how much I wanted to go for it or use it or research something. But, and I did it more because I just wanted to, I was finding myself having a hard time being present because I was so uber efficient that I would, the toilet paper has been used. Great. I'm on Amazon, like purchasing my backup, or like I was just using phone for like pure efficiency, pure like, if I didn't know what a word meant, I was immediately Googling. I'm checking my email, responding to the ones that I can get to quickly, right? So I was just interested in trying on a world in which I wasn't so hyper efficient and what it would look like to just slow down for a minute. And so for one day a week, I was turning off my phone. And the people that struggled with this the most were my friends and family. And they said, well, we won't be able to get a hold of you. And I said, well, here's the emergency protocol. Like you can call this person. Here's like, here's how you can do it in an emergency. But yeah, I'm not gonna be available with my phone on Sundays. And one of my kids said, well, then how is a mom gonna call you for a play date or a sleepover? And I was like, well, hopefully that can be scheduled on the Saturday because my phone will be off on Sunday, meaning we'll pre-plan it and I'll drop you off. I'm available, but I won't have
Right.
my phone on.
Yeah.
And what it did was it bought me and trained people around me to respect my space and boundaries. And it
Mhm.
bought me time. It really bought me time to be bored. It bought me time to listen to where my energies were and whether I missed it, right? Because I
Okay.
didn't necessarily, what did I miss? Did I miss Wordle? Did I miss talking to friends? Did I miss Instagram? Without judgment. And the answer might have been yes, I missed all those things, but paying attention to just what it was that I even missed was very instructive for me. And I did it for a year because my trying on is usually 6 months to a year because you might have a honeymoon love or hate kind of reaction for the first couple of times. So I usually find a ritual, maybe once a week or once a month is usually the way that I roll on things. And I try it for 6 to 12 months and just as an experiment, what did I learn from it? I don't do that anymore. I haven't in a while. But even having this conversation makes me curious to want to try it on again because you
Yeah.
just learn something. You observe something different every time.
I love that. And yeah,
Yeah.
awesome one for everyone to give it a shot or in your own version of it for sure.
Yeah.
And then Isla, is there anything you do in particular if you find yourself veering away from your priorities or anything that you use to help keep you on track? And I know following the calendar, it sounds like if you just do that and you've already planned it and you give yourself the buffer time that's a little bit on autopilot. And maybe there isn't as much in terms of what you have to do. And maybe that's a good benefit of doing exactly that. And maybe you don't have anything to say on that. But it's for most, when I ask that question, there usually is an answer. But like I said, I'm just thinking through your process and I'm like, wow, if you're intentional and you're setting those blocks on your calendar and some of them leave that grace and that buffer,
Mhm.
then you might not really be off track much at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think no, I think I'm off track. I think there's a couple, meaning I have moments of being off track for sure, and so I think there's part of what part of what you have to calendar is just check-in moments around what's
Mhm.
working for you and what's not working for you, and sort of evaluating whatever you're trying on. Um, what comes to my mind is, well, I want to share two quick things. I think number one, a tool I want to share with you all is getting live feedback. I call it market data. So in your check-ins or whatever your process is, thinking about something to try on would be asking people around you what their experience of you is. I had to do this in a program one year, and I've kind of done it, I'd say maybe 3 times over the last 10 years, where I pick 4 or 5 people in different domains, maybe my work domain, maybe my family domain. And I ask them typically 3 questions, and it might be an email, it might be a very casual conversation. And usually for me, I like to have it in the guise of like, I'm trying this thing on, I'm experimenting with this thing because I don't want to sound like I'm fishing for compliments or anything to
Right.
that degree. And I'll just say, what are 3 to 5 words you would use to describe me? That's the first question. Two, what can you count on me for? And three, where am I not showing up, or what's something that you have a wondering about, kind of the area of opportunity question.
Mm.
And one year, once my family sort of overwhelmingly kind of the thing that emerged in that market data was that I was not on time. Is that like, we can count on you for being late, or one thing is that you're overcommitted or you're not on time. And the aha that I had when I started to look at that was, I was like, gosh, that's not a narrative that I'm feeling good about. Like, I want to shift that narrative very proactively. And I started spending more time on, like, do I have enough travel time in my calendar? Am I being realistic with sort of how I'm calendaring? So I had that kind of check-in moment. And then I started to notice and pay attention. And I'm like, I really am showing up a lot. But if I showed up 3 times on time and the
Mhm.
fourth time I'm late, because the narrative is already that I'm late,
Mhm.
they forget all the 3 or 4 times that I get stuck and pigeonholed in this narrative. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah.
And so I spent some time actually communicating with people saying, "Hey, I'm actually really trying to work on this one thing, this narrative of being always late." And I wanted to like correct the perception, because if you think about if we just look at the data, the last 3 times I've been on time, and
Uh-huh.
one or two family members will like laugh it off as me being defensive. And I say it with a lot of love and grace, but like, I actually, when people know that I'm working on something and I'm
Yeah.
actively trying to shift it,
Uh-huh.
um, they will give me real data about how I'm doing. And so I guess my one thing I would offer, one thing I wanted to share is how I check in to make sure that I'm on track is after I intentionally put what's important to me, after I intentionally look at what narratives I want to shift, I communicate about those things, and I make time to check in with myself and with people around me as to how I'm doing on those things, right? So I think having check-in points maybe 2, 3, 4 times a year in some of the bigger goals and priorities makes sense.
Ah,
The
yeah.
second thing I wanted to share is that I recently was in a program where you study from presidents, and you get to meet some living presidents, and you also get to talk
Oh,
to their s- their
yeah.
people on their administration, including schedulers. And the idea was a leadership program, because conceivably, if you can learn from sort of the busiest office of the world, the United
Mhm.
States government presidency, then you can get some leadership tools that you might be able to use in your own locus of control. And one of the things that I found fascinating was that the president of the United States does a very similar process. They map out their agenda, their policy agenda, their goals, what needs to be true for them, family goals, engagements, priority areas. And their schedulers do checks at a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis
Mm.
to make sure, one, so back at the outset, so the president knows what their agenda is. their scheduler isn't the first, there's usually a team of schedulers. The lead scheduler is in charge of making sure proactively that those policy issue areas have time, hold, and space in the calendar. So as a meeting comes in, if the meeting is around a policy agenda number one, it's almost coded that way so that they can understand that those agendas are being advanced. But then at a weekly, monthly, quarterly clip, they do an exercise of looking backwards. If that agenda is important to you, how much time in this last week did you spend on this agenda? How much in the quarter? How much in the month, or month and then the quarter?
Hmm.
And then they look ahead. What do we need to compensate for given our data of the past month or week or quarter? What needs to be true moving into this next week? And all to say is that the schedule of the President of the United States
Wow.
is down to the minute. They have 1 minute to make the decision. It's scheduled by minute, and their 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 activities are coded both in advance and also are evaluated at a regular clip looking backwards to understand how they can be managed up. And schedulers, if they understand that, well, priority one is not getting any area, they are in charge of being the gatekeeper to other distracting kinds of things
Ah,
to make
uh-huh.
sure that if there's a focus on what the intention is of that office. So I'll let your listeners take that
Mhm.
however they want to take that. But I think there's, for me, I really felt like I don't have the time and space to do this every week. But for the most part, can I glance at my last week and understand how it maps to my priorities? And if I can't see it there, can I make space in the coming month or in the coming 2 weeks to map better to my priorities? I think is an interesting reflection.
Oh, yes, thank you. And I think from what I recall, you had to be handpicked for that program, Isla. So
I
that's
did.
insight as well. So wow, and that's thank you because that is it sounds like it's almost a matter of they're taking the real data and then actually figuring out is that time being maximized by the minute
Correct.
and then adjusting moving forward. Now, again, we may not have schedulers, but
Yeah.
even like you said, your version of, well, wait, in general, how was my week? How did I do? And what could be a little bit better? And again, I know folks that may not even take the time to plan that out. I mean, I found one Sunday that I was planning the week and like my mind felt way more at ease just
Yes.
that it's on paper. But one of the things I learned during that process, kind of like you mentioned, is making sure there were some buffer times in between because one Sunday it was pack, 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 and so packed that not all the things I wanted to get accomplished got accomplished. And I was like, oh, that's frustrating. But then again, once I started putting in those spaces, and so just as Isla pointed out before, giving yourself that grace or that really permission to experiment, but in a way you're trying it on, you're spinning around, and maybe that's just not quite the right color, the right look. That's okay. Full permission, as she said, 6 months to 12 months. I mean, that's a nice runway. So, even if you try it one or two times, don't give up. Just do what's going to work for you. So, oh my gosh, this is such gold. And I want to be mindful of your time too, Isla. So I got to guess pick what other that we've covered so much. So I guess,
Children, can I say one other piece to
yeah,
that? I
please.
think that when we work with clients, nonprofit clients, one of the things that I talk about a lot is implementation to any goal or strategy or change initiative. Um, is the implementation is what it is. The
Mhm.
the stress of implementation is addressed by your pace. That is a maxim we say from an organization perspective. The stress or the impact or the cost of your implementation is managed by your pace. What do I mean by that? I mean that there's only so many hours of the day. Time is a limited resource. And so your goal may not be a 1 year goal. You can, if you're feeling stressed and you're feeling like there's no possible way that I can achieve this thing that fulfills me, maybe it's to write a book or maybe it's, I don't know, then adjust your pacing. So that might be a 2-year goal or a 3-year goal or a 4-year goal. And you're only able to address, if it's a book, just because that's an easy analogy, you're only able to do one chapter every 6 months as opposed to one chapter a week, right? The goal is still going to be the goal, but a lot of times you may not have control over, if you feel when you look at your calendar and you evaluate your life on balance that there's not as much places of influence and control over what's yours, look at your goals and just stretch the horizon a bit, because then you can intersperse smaller steps along the way and not feel the pressure of having to overpack to, sort of get everything going. And the same might be true at work. It might be learning how to say, when something comes into work and a boss or somebody asks about a deadline, it might be saying, great, can I have this to you in about 2 weeks, when your natural inclination might be in 3 days or 1 week, or I'll have it to you by the end of the day.
Mhm.
Sometimes we
Yeah.
put that pressure and that pacing on ourselves, as
Mhm.
opposed to communicating, this is great, I should be able to turn this around, and give yourself that 1 to 2 to 3 day extra buffer before you speak the deadline. And
Yeah.
you'll be surprised that people appreciate the clarity. And if it really is a problem, they'll say, actually, we need it a little bit sooner. Like,
Mhm.
great, I'll move a few things around and get that to you by the end of the week. You can negotiate when you do things, as opposed to always just bringing urgency to every directive that comes at you. So
Yeah.
if you're feeling out of control, look at the pacing, look at your boundaries, look at your deadlines, and see what you can bring control back into
Oh,
to make
yeah.
space.
Oh, that's pure gold. Really appreciate that, Isla.
Mhm.
And also just to add to that, I'd say, what can happen, and actually I was just chatting with another consultant professional, and she was basically talking about a big project she was working on,
Mhm.
and in fact, it was a book.
Mhm.
And one of the things that came up was she felt so pressured to meet the deadline that one of her biggest regrets was not giving herself enough space to really do it in a way so that the launch of her book would be successful enough to get the traction that she really wanted out of it.
Mhm.
And in other words, she was so focused on the deadline. And yes, she met it, but she said what ended up happening is it got published, but it was, I think, in the fall. And you only have a certain window of time where people are going to look at a newly published book. And she said she missed the window, and then the holidays came. And so she said her biggest regret was not knowing all the things that go into just preparing and marketing it, and just sort of, it was more of the shorter term, getting that deadline, getting it published, versus like what's the overall intention of, she wants more PR, she wants more people to have her knowledge. So that's so helpful to have that, because again, going back to what you said earlier of the bigger intention, and really linking it back and making sure that that's in check with what you said,
Mhm.
and that it's not only okay, but you're going to get higher quality results, and be much more aligned and on track with what you actually intended by giving yourself that space. So that's another even mindset shift right there, that you have options, you can negotiate, and again, even with yourself. So thank you so much. That is
Well,
awesome.
and I love that you shared that, because I think, one of the things I might say to that friend would be, okay, the original goal or the intention, to your point, was finishing the book, and that was done,
Mhm.
but you realized along the way that you actually had a greater intention of this PR, or of
Right.
getting your knowledge, expanding. So I would say that that's her new goal, that's on a different trajectory. So I would then ask, well, what would have to be true? This book is out, maybe it didn't make the splash that it needed to make, or that you wanted it to make. What would need to be true now to achieve this goal? I don't know
Mhm.
that it is to write another book and get everything right, because you never get everything right. It might be that there's certain assets or certain speaking engagements where she can bring the book along, or there might be certain distribution opportunities that she can now use and work on and build time in her calendar and intentionality for the next phase. And I bet you once she gets to that milestone, it might feel she hasn't done everything right, or there hasn't been as much intentionality as she would have liked. And that's just our constant negotiation. That's back to the work life balance of managing our expectations constantly. But But I would just say that, like, whatever intention you have, having grace with whether you meet it or not, and then how
Mm.
you then look at your next horizon to meet the
Yes.
fields unmet is a really cool experience.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, and so encouraging. Yes. So I would say I usually do a quick lightning round, but before we do it, one last question because I'm like, I have Isla
Mm,
here. I gotta ask. So that would be, if you could maybe on the work-life balance front and maybe even on the family front, because you know, we
mhm.
didn't talk as much about it, but in terms of anything you wish you could advise to your younger self on the topic, it could be work or family, but
Mm.
anything in particular that you would have done maybe either differently or would advise your younger self on this topic?
Yes. What a great question. I think my younger self did not know the importance of having honest conversations with yourself about where your validation is coming from.
Mhm.
And so what I mean by that is my older self learned to just break down or sort of truth tell to myself. So I was in a conference one time where the person had asked, how many of you are busy? And the whole room raises hand, we're all so busy. It was a room of executive directors and CEOs. And they said, what's bad about being busy? And everybody had lots to say about, I miss this and I miss that and I'm not and I'm stressed and then she said, what's the good thing about being busy? And it was quiet. Not many people were raising their hands as much. And then someone said, well, I guess you always have kind of an excuse to not having everything perfect. And then somebody said, well, I guess you kind of have a good excuse if you don't want to do something or get out of something.
Uh-huh.
And finally, the kind of aha that the presenter shared was, well, one of the best things about being busy is that you feel important.
Yes. Yep.
And and it
Yep.
was this aha of like, oh, I'm getting validation from how busy my calendar is, or
Yeah.
how slammed I am at work, or how
Yes.
at the time the culture that I was in was like we were getting esteem and camaraderie for being up late at night and being
Yeah.
on email on a work document, right? Like there
Mhm.
was a validation structure that I had no chance against unless I
Right.
fundamentally changed where the source of validation was going to come from.
Mm.
After that conference, I was then the interim executive director of an organization, and I remember I said at a staff meeting, "We're going to change the validation structure. Now, if you finish by 5 p.m. your tasks, you're going to be seen as
Mhm.
a star performer." And I
Yep.
literally said that out loud. I said, my validation structure is when I get home by 5:30 p.m. every day, I'm going to actually be like, "Whoa, you nailed it."
Yes.
And
Yes.
we started to kind of high five, and slowly the culture started to shift where the
Mhm.
validation was actually, can you work, quote, smarter, not harder kind of
Yes.
mentality.
Yes.
And we did a cultural shift. So I guess the thing I would say that to my younger self is like I
Yeah.
just didn't pay attention to what made me feel good or where my validation was coming from. And as a result, I fell into traps that I probably didn't need to do.
Right.
And the minute that I was able, if I had my younger self sort of maybe spent a little bit more time on like what makes me feel good or important, or are there some slippery slopes or on some unhealthy behaviors that are happening because I am validating myself this way, I probably could have saved myself a little bit of some white
Sure.
hair.
Yes. Oh, I love it because, the issue is our cultural programming is
Right.
all set up that way, and sometimes we don't even realize it, but you're
Right.
so right, it's that badge of busy that you're describing that you had, in the
Love
conference,
that.
and
Badge
it's
of busy.
normal. Yeah,
Mhm.
and it's funny, in fact, of course, I was just reading it the other day, but there's some CEO, I don't remember the name of the company, but he actually pays his employees to take a vacation, and
Mhm.
not only does he pay them, I think it's like $7,500, not a small amount, but he also pays them, but it has to be with a couple caveats. It has to be that they actually have to take a vacation. I know that sounds silly, but take one. Some
Mhm.
people bank up the time and don't take a vacation. They take the vacation and they are not allowed to check their work email or their work phone during that vacation. And it's funny because his perspective is that, you think, well, gee, an extra 7,500 you're paying your employees, plus, they're not even working during that time. The point is he is investing in the employees so that when they come back, he knows they're going to be way more productive, way happier, and it's a feel good thing for the company as well, and a retention tool. So but it's
Well,
so
and I'll
yeah.
go so far as to say, some people will take the vacation and decide they won't want to come back. So the short term may not, right? But the most important gift to the company is that it gets to see its vulnerabilities. So when people actually unplug, what many companies do not understand is the true cost of their business, because people work outside the boundary. So if my true cost is that Isla works 40 hours a week, but in fact Isla's working way more than that, but I
Mm,
have no idea, what ends up happening is I'm scaling a model that's not sustainable. Because what happens if we find Islas that do only work 40 hours a week in the next jurisdiction or the next place, and you start to have a point in your company's life cycle where things implode. And so, taking care of people and helping them with boundaries is not only good for people, yes,
mhm.
but it's good for the environment, the company, for other people to understand what boundaries mean and
Yes.
how to solve for the vulnerabilities that those boundaries may mean. So going back to my cell phone example, me not taking a disconnected Saturday, I called it, was about not just my own well-being, which I learned a lot of things, but it was actually training my environment about how to be more resilient when I make a choice to disconnect
Yes.
for the day.
Yes.
And so and what needs to be true? If you really need access to me, what needs to be true? Oh, well, what needs to be true is that we need to talk on Friday night and plan the Saturday, because
Mhm.
I'm gonna have a boundary, right? So when
Right.
you have clarity and when you put up a boundary, it forces other people to understand what that vulnerability is and mitigate that risk, which I think is really.
Yes, so well pointed out for sure. Okay, and Isla, so the final part of the interview is just what I call the lightning round, and I'm just going to ask you a couple quick questions, and you can just say whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
And before I do, though, any other thoughts? Because you've got so many cool things. I'm like, I don't want to stop you.
No,
I just
no, I'm
want
good.
to
Let's
leave
go with
some
lightning round.
nice gems. Okay, so first question is your favorite book recommendation or recommendations
Oh gosh, I'm a
at
big
a
reader. I
time.
love to read, and I read 3 to 4 books at a time. A long pace, long
Yes,
pace. But
yes.
but I have right here, my favorite workbook is The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. Have you read it?
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. I just saw a YouTube video that referenced that very book that I was about to order.
It's a
Oh my
great
gosh,
book.
thank
So
you.
I will say this one because I think there's some really cool,
Okay.
practical, I feel really resonant with a lot of these tips. So
Okay.
I'll leave it there. I have too many books that I'd
Okay.
recommend.
No, perfect, perfect. Most admired person and why?
Oh my gosh, also really hard because I have so many.
Okay.
I will I will say, well, I really have learned a lot from. I'm trying to pick. I feel like I have to pick. Okay, I'm just gonna go with this one. Um, okay, fine. I'm gonna say two. My two folks that have mentored me from the pages. I read Maya Angelou. I've read her whole biography more, and that's 5 books for her biography. And I felt mentored from the pages because she's somebody who has had many lives. So she has a story about being in Nigeria, and a story about working with Dr. King, and a story as a mom, and I felt a lot of kinship about someone who is able to make change in the world with multiple hats and multifaceted approaches and many lives. So Maya Angelou for sure. And then the second one that just came quick to mind was Brian Stevenson. He's a change maker, an attorney actually, who has a lifestyle much more as ascetic monk, and
Oh,
essentially has dedicated his life to basically injustice, and specifically the injustice of Black people, mass incarceration, and penalty by death in the Deep South. And he has a book called Just Mercy, and I got to meet him. I had the pleasure of meeting him before he was so famous, and
Mm.
I've read his book, and I really appreciate and admire, opposite to Maya Angelou, how he has focused and drilled down and been almost singular in his mission for change making. And I find a lot of liberation of like being able to have almost like such a clear one, it's almost so opposite from what I admire about Maya Angelou and probably how I see myself, that I'm very curious about his lifestyle and been able to see the kind of outcomes that he's had because of his focus and his sort of where he's saying yes,
Yes.
where he's saying his no's for this bigger, deeper yes. His
Uh-huh.
no's are kids, and his no's are partnership, and his no's are right. And so I'm fascinated
Right.
by that balance.
Right. Wow.
I
Wow.
have a lot of heroes.
Oh my gosh. Okay. And then I guess it's funny because I realized because of our time, I was combining two questions. So I'm going to change your last one, which is advice you would actually give to your kids on the subject of balance and figuring all out. If it, if you could kind of just sum it up. And again, you got so much
Mm,
great wisdom there. But
I
if
would
there's
just
any
say
specific, oh man,
find what brings you joy is what I would tell
oh,
my kids. Find what
that,
brings you joy. Listen for it. It's going to change.
mm,
And I would also tell them to diversify themselves. You're not, make sure that you have I guess counter to my Brian Stevenson answer is like make
yeah,
sure that you have attention or intention to
yes,
multiple people or multiple things so that you don't create over dependence and attachment too focused on one space that causes you
mm,
pain. I don't think Brian Stevenson, I think he's very intentional about where he's focused his efforts. But
yeah.
if you're not that intentional, I think being able to diversify and make sure that you're able to listen from multiple experiences and sources is a really valuable thing.
Ah, wow, Isla, this was amazing.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you so much. And where can people find you if they want to learn more about the
I
wonderful?
I hang out. So I have a website that has all the like links to me, and it's Aila Malik, my name, AILAMALIK.com. But I tend to hang out on Instagram and LinkedIn. I have a Twitter, but I'm not
Yeah.
able to manage so many. So Instagram, please, I would love to connect with people that are interested in this kind of talk and this kind of learning, and then LinkedIn for sure.
Okay. And I'll definitely put all of Isla's links in our links below. And again, remember for those of you that want to take advantage of some free resources, we've got that free guide on how to focus on your priorities and the daily happiness formula, a one pager with instructions to kind of help give you a boost during the day. So definitely take a look at those, and we will see you in the next episode. I'm so excited. And thank you so much again, Isla. You are amazing.
Thank you, Gilda. Now I want to see that. I'm going to also download your one pager. I love it.